On a summer afternoon in 1928, F. Scott Fitzgerald stood at the edge of a vast terrace overlooking Long Island Sound. Before him stretched manicured gardens, reflecting pools and the glittering waters of the Huntington Bay. Behind him rose a château that seemed lifted directly from the Loire Valley and set down among the rolling hills of New York's Gold Coast. The mansion belonged to his neighbor, Otto Kahn, one of America's most powerful financiers. As Fitzgerald watched servants move like ghosts through the 127 rooms, as he observed the endless stream of Rolls-Royces delivering guests for another spectacular party, he saw something that would haunt him forever: the beautiful emptiness of American wealth. That mansion was Oheka Castle, and it would become the inspiration for the most famous fictional home in American literature. J. Gatsby's estate in The Great Gatsby. But unlike Fitzgerald's golden dream, Oheka's story is one of genius and madness, of artistic triumph and financial ruin, of a castle that would outlive its creator, only to fall into darkness for nearly half a century. Today, Oheka Castle stands restored to its former glory, a luxury hotel and event venue where couples marry beneath the same chandeliers that once illuminated some of the most exclusive parties in American history. But the shadows of its past still linger in every marble corridor, every gilded room, every corner where Otto Kahn's dreams were made real, and where they ultimately died. This is the story of America's second-largest private residence, a 109,000 square foot palace that cost the equivalent of $158 million to build, and the brilliant, tortured man who built it. It's a tale of ambition without limits, beauty without restraint, and the price one pays for trying to create paradise on Earth. Chapter 1. The Golden Coast. To understand why Otto Kahn built his castle, you must first understand the world he built it in. The early 1900s were a time when America's new aristocracy, railroad barons, steel magnates, and Wall Street titans looked to Europe for inspiration. They didn't just want wealth, they wanted the appearance of centuries-old nobility. And nowhere was this desire more evident than on Long Island's North Shore, a stretch of coastline that would come to be known as the Gold Coast. Between 1890 and 1930, this 30-mile stretch from Great Neck to Huntington became home to more millionaires per square mile than anywhere else in America. The Astors built their palaces here. The Guggenheims constructed their monuments. The Vanderbilts raised their temples to fortune. Each mansion was grander than the last, each estate more elaborate, each garden more perfect. But even among these titans, Otto Kahn stood apart. While his neighbors built big, Kahn dreamed bigger. While they imported art, he imported entire rooms. While they hired architects, he hired visionaries. And while they built homes, Otto Kahn set out to build something unprecedented in America. A perfect reproduction of a French château, complete down to the smallest architectural detail. The site he chose was 443 acres of rolling farmland in Cold Spring Harbor, the highest point on Long Island. From this hill, you could see across the Sound to Connecticut, south to the Atlantic, and east toward the Hamptons. It was, quite literally, a kingdom overlooking the world Kahn had conquered. The local farmers who sold their land to Kahn in 1914 had no idea what he planned to build. They saw a successful businessman buying property for a country retreat. They couldn't have imagined that he intended to construct the second-largest private residence in American history, a 127-room castle that would employ 126 servants and cost more than many small cities' annual budgets. The timing seemed perfect. Kahn was at the height of his power, one of the senior partners at Kuhn, Loeb & Co.'s, the investment bank that had helped finance America's railroads and industrial expansion. He had wealth that seemed limitless, influence that reached from Wall Street to Washington, and artistic sensibilities that had made him the patron saint of opera, theater, and ballet in America. But 1914 was also the year World War I began in Europe, the year the old world started to crumble. As Kahn broke ground for his French chateau on American soil, the actual chateaux of France were being destroyed by artillery shells. He was building a monument to a civilization that was already dying, creating a perfect replica of European aristocracy just as that aristocracy was tearing itself apart. In many ways, Oheka Castle would become a symbol of this contradiction, a masterpiece of European culture built with American money, a perfect preservation of the past created in a country racing toward the future, a monument to old world values constructed by a Jewish immigrant in a society that often excluded people like him from its highest circles. Chapter 2: The Banker Who Collected Dreams. Otto Hermann Kahn was born on February 21, 1867 in Mannheim, Germany, to a middle-class Jewish family. His father, Bernhard, ran a small restaurant and hotel. His mother, Emma, was a cultured woman who filled their modest home with music and literature. From an early age, Otto showed two defining characteristics: an extraordinary mind for numbers and an insatiable hunger for beauty. As a boy, Otto could calculate complex mathematical problems in his head while reciting poetry he had memorized. He studied cello and spoke multiple languages fluently by his teens. But it was when his father took him to the opera in nearby Frankfurt that Otto's true passion was awakened. Sitting in the darkness, watching the elaborate costumes and painted scenery, listening to voices that seemed to transcend human limitations, young Otto Kahn discovered what would drive him for the rest of his life: the desire to create and preserve beauty. At 17, Otto left Germany for London to learn banking at Deutsche Bank. The transition was jarring. From a warm family home filled with music and laughter, he moved to a cold boarding house and a career focused entirely on profit and loss. But Otto adapted with remarkable speed. He had a natural talent for understanding money, how it moved, how it grew, how it could be transformed into power. Within 5 years, Otto had made himself indispensable to Deutsche Bank's London operations. He worked 18-hour days, memorized the financial histories of hundreds of companies, and developed an almost supernatural ability to predict market movements. But even as his bank account grew, Otto felt empty. He was making money, but he wasn't making meaning. In 1893, at age 26, Otto made the decision that would define his life. He immigrated to America and joined the prestigious investment bank Kuhn, Loeb & Cohrs in New York. The firm, founded by German Jewish immigrants like himself, was one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. Under Otto's leadership, they would help finance the construction of America's railroads, fund the growth of major corporations, and essentially build the infrastructure of the modern American economy. But Otto's real genius wasn't just in making money. It was in understanding that money was simply a tool for creating the world you wanted to live in. While his competitors hoarded their wealth or spent it on conventional luxuries, Otto began using his fortune to transform American culture. He became the primary financial backer of the Metropolitan Opera, funding productions of unprecedented scale and beauty. He supported struggling artists, commissioned new works, and essentially created the American classical music scene. By 1900, Otto had achieved everything a Jewish immigrant could dream of in America. He was worth tens of millions of dollars, wielded enormous political influence, and was accepted in the highest social circles. He had married Addie Wolf, the daughter of another prominent German Jewish banking family, and they lived in an elegant townhouse on East 91st Street in Manhattan. They traveled to Europe regularly, collecting art and attending the finest cultural events. Yet Otto remained restless. He had conquered Wall Street, but he felt like he was still living in someone else's world. A world where Jewish names were whispered rather than celebrated, where old money families looked down on new money achievements, where even the richest immigrant was still considered an outsider. Otto Kahn wanted more than acceptance. He wanted to create his own world, a place where beauty and culture reigned supreme, where his vision of the perfect life could be made real. It was during a trip to France in 1912 that Otto found his inspiration. Walking through the Château de Fontainebleau, he was struck by the seamless integration of architecture, art, and landscape. Every room told a story. Every detail had meaning. Every view was perfectly composed. He realized that what he wanted to build was not just a house, but a work of art that happened to be habitable. When Otto returned to New York, he began quietly purchasing land on Long Island. He told friends he was planning a weekend retreat. In reality, he was preparing to build the most ambitious private residence in American history, a place where he could finally live in the world he had always imagined. Chapter 3: The Architects of Impossibility. When Otto Kahn decided to build his dream chateau, he faced a problem no amount of money could easily solve. How do you create a perfect French castle on Long Island? The answer lay in finding architects who understood that they weren't just designing a house, they were creating a fantasy made real. Kahn hired the firm of Delano and Aldrich, two of the most prestigious architects in America. Mirror William Adams. Delano and Chester Holmes Aldrich specialized in what was known as the American Renaissance style, taking the finest examples of European architecture and adapting them for American millionaires. They had already designed mansions for the Astors and the Rockefellers. But what Otto Kahn was proposing was unlike anything they had ever attempted. Kahn didn't want a house inspired by French chateau. He wanted an exact reproduction of the finest chateau architecture, built with American construction techniques and filled with American conveniences. He showed Delano and Aldrich hundreds of photographs from his trips to France, detailed architectural drawings he had commissioned, and room-by-room specifications for a palace that existed only in his imagination. The primary inspiration was the Château de Fontainebleau, specifically its 18th-century wings designed during the reign of Louis XV. But Kahn also incorporated elements from Versailles, from the Loire Valley Château, and from dozens of smaller French country houses. The result would be something that had never existed in France, a chateau that represented the perfection of French design, freed from the constraints of historical compromise. Delano and Aldrich quickly realized they were dealing with a client unlike any other. Kahn didn't just have opinions about every detail. He had educated, sophisticated opinions. He could discuss the proper proportions of classical columns, the historical evolution of French window design, and the symbolic meaning of various architectural elements. He had studied European architecture with the same intensity he had once applied to financial markets. The architect's biggest challenge was scale. The original French chateau that inspired Kahn had been built over centuries, often starting as medieval fortresses and gradually expanding into Renaissance palaces. Kahn wanted all of that architectural evolution compressed into a single, unified design. The main building would stretch 400 feet across and rise 5 stories high, making it larger than most European palaces. To achieve the perfect proportions, Delano and Aldrich created scale models of every major room and facade. They built a complete miniature version of the chateau in their New York office, allowing Kahn to walk around it and study it from every angle. They revised the design dozens of times, adjusting window heights, relocating doorways, and refining the relationship between the main building and its supporting structures. The interior design was entrusted to the legendary French decorator Jacques Graber, who had worked on some of the finest private residences in Paris. Graber understood that Kahn wanted more than mere luxury. He wanted authenticity. Every room would be designed in a specific historical period, from Louis XVIII Baroque to Louis XVI Neoclassical. The furniture would be museum-quality antiques or exact reproductions crafted by the same workshops that had served French royalty. But perhaps the most crucial member of the design team was the landscape architect, the Olmsted Brothers firm, sons of Frederick Law Olmsted, who had designed Central Park. They were tasked with creating gardens that would seamlessly connect the chateau to its Long Island setting. This meant designing French formal gardens that could survive New York winters, creating sightlines that would frame views of Long Island Sound, like they were views of the Seine, and establishing the illusion that this perfect chateau had always belonged on this American hilltop. By 1915, the design was complete. The team had created plans for a 127-room chateau that would be the second largest private residence in America, surpassed only by the Biltmore Estate. It would contain 39 bedrooms, 39 bathrooms, a ballroom that could accommodate 200 guests, a library with 60,000 books, and a formal dining room with seating for 200. The total cost was estimated at $11 million, equivalent to approximately $250 million today. Otto Kahn approved the plans without hesitation. After years of dreaming, his perfect world was finally ready to be built. All that remained was the small matter of moving mountains, importing forests, and creating a French chateau on Long Island that would be more authentically French than most buildings in France. Chapter 4. Building the Impossible. Construction of Oheka Castle began in earnest in 1915. and from the very first day, it was clear this would be no ordinary building project. Otto Kahn had hired over 600 workers, making the construction site one of the largest employers on Long Island. But these weren't typical construction workers. They were master craftsmen, many of them brought over from Europe specifically for this project. The first challenge was the site itself. Kahn wanted his chateau to sit atop the highest point on Long Island, but that hill was far from level. Engineers spent months blasting away portions of the hilltop while building up other areas. They moved an estimated 200,000 cubic yards of earth, essentially reshaping the landscape to match Kahn's vision. When neighbors complained about the constant explosions, Kahn offered to buy their properties too. Several accepted. The foundation required special techniques never before used in American residential construction. Because of the building's enormous size and weight, standard footings wouldn't suffice. Engineers drove steel pilings deep into the bedrock, then poured reinforced concrete foundations strong enough to support a skyscraper. The foundation work alone took 18 months and cost more than most people's entire houses. But it was the materials that truly set Oheka apart. Kahn had instructed his architects to use only the finest available, regardless of cost. The exterior walls were built with Indiana limestone, the same stone used for the Empire State Building. But this wasn't ordinary limestone. Each block was hand-selected for its uniform color and texture. Masons rejected stones with even the slightest imperfections, sending them back to the quarries and demanding perfect replacements. The roof required 20,000 handcrafted slate tiles imported directly from Welsh quarries. Each tile was individually inspected and numbered before being shipped across the Atlantic. French artisans were brought to Long Island to install them according to traditional techniques that hadn't changed in centuries. The result was a roof that looked like it had been transplanted directly from the Loire Valley. Inside, the craftsmanship reached levels that bordered on the obsessive. The main staircase was carved from a single piece of marble, quarried in Italy specifically for this purpose. The marble was so large that it had to be shipped to New York in pieces, then reassembled by Italian stonemasons who had been flown in exclusively for this task. The staircase alone took 14 months to complete. The ballroom presented unique challenges. Kahn wanted a space that could accommodate 200 dancers with perfect acoustics for a full orchestra. The ceiling was designed to be 40 feet high, supported by hidden steel beams that wouldn't interfere with the room's classical proportions. French gilders spent 6 months applying gold leaf to the elaborate ceiling moldings, using techniques that had been perfected at Versailles. Every room required different specialists. The library needed custom millwork to house 60,000 volumes, with hidden sliding ladders and climate control systems to protect rare manuscripts. The wine cellar was carved directly into the bedrock, with temperature controls that maintained perfect conditions for Kahn's collection of rare vintages. The conservatory required a complex system of glass panels and heating pipes that would allow tropical plants to survive Long Island winters. But perhaps the most complex challenge was the chateau's mechanical systems. Kahn wanted all the conveniences of modern American life hidden within perfectly authentic French period rooms. This meant concealing electricity, plumbing, heating, and telephone systems within walls designed to look like 18th century French interiors. Engineers had to route miles of wiring and piping through specially designed hollow spaces in the walls. The heating system alone was a marvel of engineering. Because radiators would have destroyed the authentic appearance of the period rooms, engineers designed an elaborate network of heated air ducts hidden within the walls and floors. Warm air was distributed throughout the chateau through decorative grilles designed to look like original French architectural elements. As construction progressed, the cost spiraled beyond even Kahn's generous estimates. The handcrafted materials, imported artisans, and constant design revisions had pushed the budget far beyond the original $11 million. By 1917, Kahn had already spent $8 million, and the chateau was barely half finished. But he never considered cutting corners or reducing the scope of his vision. If anything, each completed section inspired him to make the remaining work even more elaborate. Local newspapers began covering the construction as a regional attraction. Society reporters described the daily arrival of trucks carrying marble from Italy, tapestries from France, and artwork from auction houses across Europe. The project had become the talk of New York's social elite, with speculation running wild about when the mysterious chateau would finally be completed and what kind of parties Otto Kahn would throw there. By 1919, after 4 years of intensive construction, Oheka Castle was finally nearing completion. The enormous chateau rose majestically above Long Island Sound, its limestone walls glowing golden in the afternoon sun, its slate roof gleaming like pewter. At 109,000 square feet, it was the largest private residence ever built in New York State and the second largest in all of America. The final cost had reached $11 million, equivalent to approximately $158 million in today's currency. It was an astronomical sum, even by the standards of America's Gilded Age elite. But as Otto Kahn stood on his completed terrace, looking out over gardens that stretched to the horizon and a chateau that fulfilled his every dream, he believed it had been worth every penny. He had created perfection. Now all that remained was to live in it. Chapter 5. The Golden Summers. The first party at Oheka Castle was held on July 4th, 1919. Otto Kahn had invited 200 of New York's most prominent families to celebrate both Independence Day and the completion of his chateau. As guests arrived in their chauffeur-driven automobiles climbing the winding drive through manicured gardens, they gasped at their first sight of the completed palace. The main facade stretched for 400 feet, its Indiana limestone walls rising 5 stories and crowned with the distinctive French slate roof. Twin towers flanked the central entrance, which was reached by a grand marble staircase that seemed to flow like water down the hillside. Every window was perfectly proportioned, every architectural detail authentic to 18th century French design. It was as if someone had transported Versailles to Long Island and improved it. Inside, guests found themselves in a world that redefined luxury. The grand hall soared 40 feet overhead, its walls lined with authentic French boiserie, hand-carved wood paneling that had been purchased from a dismantled chateau and painstakingly restored. Massive baccarat crystal chandeliers cast warm light across Persian rugs that had once graced royal palaces. Every piece of furniture was either a museum-quality antique or a perfect reproduction crafted by the same workshops that had served European royalty. The ballroom left guests speechless. Designed to accommodate 200 dancers, it featured a 40-foot ceiling covered in gold leaf, walls lined with silk damask, and floors of rare parquet that had been assembled by French craftsmen. When the orchestra began to play, a full symphony that Kahn had hired for the evening, the acoustics were so perfect that every note seemed to float effortlessly through the air. But it was the attention to detail that truly amazed Kahn's guests. In the Louis XVI dining room, each of the 200-place settings featured different pieces of rare china, some dating back centuries. The wine cellar contained over 10,000 bottles, including vintages that predated the American Revolution. Even the servants' quarters were more luxurious than most millionaires' homes, with each of the 126 staff members provided with private rooms and modern conveniences. Through the 1920s, Oheka Castle became the unofficial summer capital of New York society. Kahn and his wife Addie hosted elaborate weekend parties that lasted from Friday evening through Monday morning. Guests included titans of industry, celebrated artists, European nobility, and political figures. The castle's guest list read like a who's who of the era: Charles Evans Hughes, Winston Churchill, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Arturo Toscanini, and George Gershwin were all regular visitors. The typical weekend at Oheka followed a carefully orchestrated schedule designed to maximize both relaxation and social opportunities. Guests arrived Friday evening to champagne and hors d'oeuvres in the conservatory, surrounded by tropical plants that bloomed year-round, despite the Long Island climate. Saturday featured elaborate breakfasts, lawn games, afternoon concerts in the music room, and formal dinners followed by dancing in the ballroom. Sunday mornings were reserved for quiet pursuits, reading in the library, walking through the formal gardens, or simply enjoying the views from the countless terraces and balconies. Sunday evenings featured more intimate gatherings, often centered around musical performances in the music room, where world-renowned artists would perform for audiences of 30 or 40 privileged guests. But Oheka's most famous neighbor was a young writer named F. Scott Fitzgerald, who lived just across the bay in West Egg. Fitzgerald was Invited to several of Kahn's parties, and he was both fascinated and appalled by the display of wealth. He watched guests arrive in Rolls-Royces and depart in private yachts. He observed the army of servants who made luxury appear effortless. He noted the strange mixture of authentic beauty and artificial grandeur. In his notebooks, Fitzgerald described Oheka as a place where money had defeated time, noting how the château created the illusion of centuries-old aristocracy in a country barely 150 years old. The castle would serve as inspiration for Jay Gatsby's fictional mansion, though Fitzgerald recognized something darker in Kahn's achievement: the loneliness that comes from creating perfection in an imperfect world. Indeed, despite the endless stream of guests and constant activity, those who knew Otto Kahn well noticed a growing melancholy in their host. He had achieved everything he had dreamed of: wealth, influence, cultural significance, and a home that was literally a work of art. Yet he seemed increasingly isolated within his perfect world, a king in a castle that was somehow too beautiful for real life. The yearly operating costs of Oheka Castle were staggering. Maintaining the 126 servants, heating the enormous chateau, preserving the priceless art and antiques, and supporting the elaborate social schedule cost Kahn approximately $2 million annually, equivalent to $30 million today. But during the prosperous 1920s, when his investment bank was making record profits, these costs seemed manageable. The gardens alone required a full-time staff of 30 gardeners working under the direction of a landscape architect imported from the famous Château de Versailles. They maintained 18 acres of formal French gardens, including intricate parterre designs, topiary sculptures, reflecting pools, and exotic plants that required constant care in Long Island's challenging climate. As the decade progressed, Oheka Castle reached the height of its glory. It had become more than just a private residence. It was a cultural institution, a place where art and commerce, European sophistication, and American energy combined to create something uniquely magnificent. Otto Kahn had succeeded in building his perfect world, but perfection, as he would soon discover, is expensive to maintain and impossible to protect from the chaos of history. Chapter 6: The Cracks in Paradise. The first sign of trouble came not from Wall Street, but from within the castle walls. In 1924, Otto Kahn's marriage to Addie began to show signs of strain. While they had always maintained separate social circles, she preferred quiet dinner parties with old-money families, while he enjoyed large gatherings with artists and intellectuals. Their differences had become more pronounced, as Oheka consumed more and more of his attention and resources. Addie Kahn had never shared her husband's passion for grand entertaining. She found the constant stream of weekend guests exhausting, the elaborate parties vulgar, and the chateau itself too large and impersonal for family life. She began spending more time at their Manhattan townhouse, leaving Otto to play host alone at Oheka. The castle that was meant to be the center of their social life had instead become a symbol of their growing separation. Their 4 children, Maud, Gilbert, Roger, and Margaret, had mixed feelings about their fairy tale home. While they enjoyed the prestige that came with living in America's most famous private residence, they also felt the weight of their father's expectations. Every room in Oheka was perfect, every detail precisely controlled. There was no space for the natural chaos of childhood, no room for mistakes or spontaneity. By the late 1920s, Otto's children had all reached adulthood and moved away, pursuing their own lives and interests. The enormous chateau, built to accommodate large family gatherings, began to feel empty despite the constant presence of guests and servants. Otto found himself increasingly alone in his perfect palace, surrounded by beautiful objects, but isolated from the meaningful relationships that had once sustained him. Meanwhile, the financial landscape that had made Oheka possible was beginning to shift. The easy profits of the 1920s investment boom were becoming harder to sustain. While Kuhn, Loeb & Kohner remained profitable, Otto noticed that the strategies that had made him wealthy were no longer as effective. Younger financiers with different approaches were challenging the old guard investment banks. More troubling were the rising costs of maintaining Oheka. The castle's elaborate systems required constant maintenance by specialized craftsmen. The gardens demanded year-round attention from expert horticulturists. The art collection needed climate-controlled storage and professional conservation. The 126 servants expected regular salary increases. What had once seemed like manageable expenses were becoming a significant drain on even Otto's vast fortune. Otto tried to offset these costs by reducing the scale of his entertaining, hosting smaller parties and fewer overnight guests. But this created its own problems. The chateau had been designed for grand social events. When used for intimate gatherings, its vast rooms felt uncomfortable and unwelcoming. The ballroom that had once hosted 200 dancers now echoed emptily with just 20 guests. The dining room that had accommodated elaborate dinner parties now seemed absurdly oversized for family meals. There were also subtle changes in American society that made Oheka feel increasingly out of place. The country was becoming more democratic, less deferential to old-world aristocracy. The elaborate European formality that had once impressed guests now struck many as pretentious and outdated. Jazz music was replacing classical orchestras. Casual entertaining was becoming more popular than formal dinner parties, and American culture was developing confidence in its own style rather than copying European models. Otto himself was aging. Born in 1867, he was in his early 60s by the late 1920s, and the constant stress of managing both his financial empire and his cultural activities was taking its toll. He suffered from recurring health problems, including heart palpitations that his doctors attributed to overwork and stress. The man who had once seemed to have limitless energy was beginning to show signs of fatigue. Perhaps most significantly, the anti-Semitism that Otto had hoped to overcome through achievement and cultural sophistication was actually increasing in American society. Despite his wealth, influence, and cultural contributions, he still encountered social barriers and professional limitations that his Protestant neighbors never faced. Some of the most exclusive clubs still refused to admit him, some business opportunities remained closed to him, and some social circles continued to treat him as an outsider. But it was on October 24, 1929, that Otto Kahn's world truly began to collapse. Black Thursday marked the beginning of the Wall Street crash that would devastate the American economy and destroy many of the great fortunes of the Gilded Age. As stocks plummeted and banks failed, Otto watched decades of carefully accumulated wealth disappear in a matter of days. Kuhn, Loeb and Comer survived the initial crash, but the firm's business model, based on financing America's industrial expansion, was no longer viable in a contracting economy. The railroad bonds that had made Otto rich became virtually worthless. The industrial companies he had helped build were laying off workers and cutting production. The investment banking fees that had financed his lifestyle simply disappeared. As 1929 ended and the full scope of the economic disaster became clear, Otto faced a terrible choice. He could continue to maintain Oheka Castle at its current level, which would mean selling assets and depleting his remaining capital at an unsustainable rate. Or he could drastically reduce the castle's operations, laying off most of the staff and essentially mothballing the palace he had spent 15 years perfecting. For a man who had dedicated his life to creating beauty and perfection, it was an impossible decision. Oheka Castle was more than just his home. It was his masterpiece, his contribution to American culture, his attempt to create something that would outlast his own mortality. But it was also a luxury that he could no longer afford, a dream that was becoming a financial nightmare. Chapter 7. The Fall of the King. The Great Depression hit Otto Kahn with devastating precision. Unlike the railroad barons whose wealth was built on physical assets, or the oil magnates whose fortunes were based on natural resources, Kahn's wealth was largely tied to financial instruments that became worthless overnight. By 1932, his investment portfolio had lost nearly 80% of its value, and the income from Kuhn, Loeb and Coase had dropped to a fraction of its 1920s levels. The first casualties were the weekend parties. The elaborate social calendar that had made Oheka famous simply stopped. The 200-guest dinners, the orchestra concerts, the charity galas, all were quietly canceled. The guest rooms that had once accommodated European nobility and American titans stood empty, their silk wallpapers fading in the afternoon sun. Next came the staff reductions. The 126 servants who had made Oheka function like a small palace were gradually dismissed. First, the specialized craftsmen, the French gilders, Italian stoneworkers, and master gardeners, then the musicians, extra footmen, and seasonal workers. By 1933, the staff had been reduced to just 30 essential employees. Cooks, housekeepers, and groundskeepers needed to maintain basic operations. The gardens suffered most visibly. The elaborate formal parterres, topiary sculptures, and exotic plant collections required constant expert care. As the specialized gardeners were dismissed and their maintenance routines abandoned, the French formal gardens began their slow transformation back into Long Island countryside. Weeds appeared in the gravel paths, hedges grew wild, and the reflecting pools developed layers of fallen leaves. Otto tried desperately to maintain the chateau's appearance while cutting costs wherever possible. He sold some of his art collection, including several important French paintings and pieces of antique furniture. He closed entire wings of the castle, concentrating the remaining staff in just a few rooms of the enormous residence. He canceled subscriptions to expensive services, dismissed consultants, and eliminated all non-essential maintenance. But the fundamental problem was structural. Oheka Castle had been designed as the center of an elaborate social life that required enormous resources to sustain. Every aspect of the building, from its oversized rooms to its specialized systems, assumed a level of wealth and social activity that no longer existed. The castle that had been Otto's greatest achievement was now becoming his greatest burden. The isolation was perhaps worse than the financial pressure. Otto's health was declining. His wife spent most of her time in the city, and his children visited rarely. The friends and business associates who had once competed for invitations to Oheka now avoided Otto, embarrassed by his reduced circumstances, or fearful that association with him might damage their own reputations. In 1931, Otto suffered a serious heart attack while working at his desk in the library. As he recovered in his bedroom, attended by a single nurse and visited by only his immediate family, the contrast with his former life was stark. The man who had once hosted presidents and patronized opera companies was now living like an invalid in a castle that had become his prison. Otto's business interests continued to decline. Kuhn, Loeb & Co. was struggling to survive in the new financial environment, and Otto's declining health made it impossible for him to provide the leadership the firm needed. Younger partners began making decisions without consulting him, and his influence within the company, the source of his wealth and power, steadily eroded. By 1932, Otto was forced to consider the unthinkable, selling Oheka Castle. He quietly contacted several real estate agents, hoping to find a buyer who would appreciate the chateau's unique qualities and maintain it as a private residence. But the economic climate was impossible. Even families with sufficient wealth to purchase Oheka were unwilling to take on the enormous operating costs during such uncertain times. The few potential buyers who toured the castle were intimidated by its scale and complexity. One wealthy industrialist calculated that properly maintaining Oheka would require an annual expenditure of $3 million, more than most corporations' entire budgets. Another noted that the specialized nature of the castle's systems would require permanently employing craftsmen who might be impossible to find and prohibitively expensive to retain. As 1933 turned into 1934, Otto's health continued to deteriorate. The stress of his financial situation, combined with the emotional pain of watching his life's work crumble, accelerated his physical decline. His doctors warned that the strain was putting dangerous pressure on his heart and recommended that he consider moving to a smaller, more manageable residence. But Otto couldn't bring himself to abandon Oheka. Despite the financial burden, despite the loneliness, despite the obvious impracticality of maintaining such an enormous residence with such limited resources, he clung to his castle. It represented not just his wealth, but his vision, his taste, his contribution to American culture. Leaving Oheka would be like admitting that his entire life's work had been a failure. On March 29, 1934, Otto Kahn died in his sleep at Oheka Castle. He was 67 years old, and according to his personal physician, his heart simply stopped. Some said it was the final result of years of stress and overwork. Others believed more romantically that Otto's heart broke when he realized his perfect world could not be preserved. The funeral was held in the ballroom, where Otto had once hosted 200 dancers. Fewer than 50 people attended, mostly family members and a handful of loyal friends who had remained close despite his changed circumstances. The man who had once been one of America's most celebrated cultural figures was buried quietly, with little fanfare and surprisingly few public tributes. Otto's death left his family with an impossible inheritance, a 127-room castle that was too expensive to maintain, but too unique to abandon. The chateau that had been built as a monument to one man's vision of perfect beauty had become a beautiful burden that would haunt the Kahn family for decades to come. Chapter 8. The Abandoned Palace. After Otto Kahn's death, Oheka Castle faced an uncertain future. His widow Addie inherited the estate, but at age 68 and in poor health, she had neither the energy nor the resources to maintain the enormous chateau. The castle that had once employed 126 servants now operated with a skeleton staff of just 6 people: a caretaker, a cook, a groundskeeper, and 3 housekeepers who tried desperately to maintain some semblance of order in the 127 rooms. Addie Kahn attempted to sell the castle throughout the late 1930s, but the combination of its enormous size, specialized systems, and astronomical operating costs made it virtually unsellable. Real estate agents described it as white elephant, a property so unique and expensive that no rational buyer would consider purchasing it. The few potential buyers who toured the castle were overwhelmed by the scale of the commitment required. One prospective buyer, a steel magnate from Pittsburgh, spent 3 days touring every room of the castle with a team of engineers and accountants. Their final report concluded that properly maintaining Oheka Castle would require a full-time staff of at least 100 people and an annual budget of $2.5 million. In the middle of the Great Depression, such expenses were simply impossible for even the wealthiest families to justify. As World War II approached, Addie Kahn made the difficult decision to essentially abandon Oheka Castle. She moved permanently to the family's Manhattan townhouse and dismissed the remaining staff except for a single caretaker who would visit the property weekly to check for damage and prevent vandalism. The chateau that had once been the social center of American high society fell silent. The transformation was swift and heartbreaking. Without daily maintenance, the elaborate mechanical systems began to fail. Pipes froze in the unheated castle during the harsh winter of 1940, causing water damage to several rooms. The lack of climate control caused the wooden paneling to crack and warp. Dust accumulated on the priceless art and antique furniture that remained in the abandoned rooms. The gardens, which had required 30 full-time gardeners to maintain their formal perfection, quickly reverted to wilderness. The elaborate parterre designs disappeared under weeds and volunteer trees. The topiary sculptures lost their shapes and became ordinary hedges. The reflecting pools filled with leaves and debris, eventually cracking from freeze-thaw cycles and becoming muddy ponds. During World War II, the U.S. government briefly considered converting Oheka Castle into a military facility, perhaps a training center for officers or a convalescent hospital for wounded soldiers. Officials toured the property and developed preliminary plans for such a conversion, but the cost of adapting the chateau's elaborate systems for institutional use proved prohibitive, even for the federal government. In 1948, Addie Kahn died, leaving the castle to her children, who faced the same impossible choice their mother had confronted. None of Otto's children had the resources to restore and maintain Oheka, but they also couldn't bring themselves to sell their father's masterpiece for demolition. The castle remained empty, slowly deteriorating, while the family searched for some solution that would preserve Otto's legacy. Throughout the 1950s, various proposals were made for Oheka Castle's future. A Catholic religious order expressed interest in converting it into a monastery, but withdrew when they calculated the cost of heating the building. A hotel chain considered purchasing the property for conversion into a luxury resort, but determined that the chateau's historic architecture couldn't be modified to accommodate modern hotel amenities without destroying its character. The most serious proposal came in 1955 from a developer who wanted to demolish the castle and subdivide the 443-acre estate for suburban housing. The plan would have created one of Long Island's most prestigious residential developments, with the chateau's former gardens becoming an exclusive golf course. The potential profits were enormous, and for a time it seemed inevitable that Otto's dream palace would be reduced to rubble. However, this demolition plan sparked the first serious preservation efforts in Oheka's history. Art historians and architectural preservationists argued that the castle was irreplaceable, not just as an example of fine architecture, but as a symbol of American cultural ambition. The Kahn family faced with growing public pressure to preserve their father's legacy, reluctantly withdrew from the demolition agreement. But preservation sentiment alone couldn't solve the fundamental problem. Oheka Castle required massive capital investment to prevent further deterioration, and no one was willing or able to provide those resources. By 1960, the chateau had been empty for nearly 20 years. Its magnificent rooms were filled with dust and shadows. Its elaborate gardens had become an overgrown wilderness, and its mechanical systems had largely failed. Local teenagers began using the abandoned castle for parties and vandalism. Windows were broken, graffiti appeared on the limestone walls, and several valuable fixtures were stolen. The caretaker, now elderly and working alone, couldn't prevent the increasing damage. Each year, more of Otto Kahn's perfect vision was lost to neglect and abuse. In 1963, the Kahn family finally found a buyer, the Eastern Military Academy, a private boarding school that wanted to convert the castle into dormitories and classrooms. The sale price was just $100,000, less than 1% of the original construction cost. Otto's $11 million chateau was being sold for essentially the value of its land alone. The military academy's plans were ambitious but ultimately destructive. They intended to divide the chateau's grand rooms into smaller spaces, suitable for student housing, install institutional bathrooms and kitchens, and add modern heating and electrical systems without regard for the building's historic character. While this would have saved the castle from demolition, it would have destroyed most of the architectural and artistic elements that made it significant. But before these renovations could begin, the Eastern Military Academy encountered financial difficulties and was forced to abandon its plans for Oheka Castle. Once again, the chateau found itself without an owner capable of maintaining it. Once again, Otto Kahn's dream palace faced an uncertain future, caught between preservation and destruction, between its glorious past and an increasingly doubtful future. Chapter 9. The Dreamer Returns. In 1984, a 34-year-old developer named Gary Melius drove up the overgrown driveway of Oheka Castle for the first time. He had heard rumors about the abandoned chateau for years. Local Long Island residents spoke of it in whispers, describing a magnificent palace that had been left to decay for nearly half a century. What Melius found when he finally saw the castle shocked him into silence. The limestone facade was black with decades of weather staining. Many windows were broken or boarded up with plywood. The formal gardens had completely disappeared under tangles of weeds and volunteer trees. The grand entrance staircase was cracked and crumbling, with chunks of marble scattered across the terrace. What had once been America's most magnificent private residence looked more like a haunted ruin from a Gothic novel. But as Melius walked through the abandoned rooms, he began to see past the decay to the extraordinary achievement beneath. The hand-carved boiserie was still magnificent, despite layers of dust and grime. The marble floors remained solid and beautiful under decades of accumulated debris. The elaborate plasterwork ceilings showed their original artistry even where pieces had fallen and broken on the floor below. Melius was not a preservation-minded romantic. He was a hard-headed businessman who had made his fortune developing shopping centers and office buildings. But something about Oheka Castle captured his imagination in a way that no project ever had. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity of Otto Kahn's original vision. Perhaps it was the tragedy of seeing such beauty abandoned. Or perhaps Melius simply recognized a business opportunity that others had missed. After weeks of negotiation, Melius purchased Oheka Castle and its remaining 23 acres for $1.5 million. The Eastern Military Academy, which had owned the property since 1963 but never developed it, was happy to sell to anyone willing to take responsibility for the increasingly expensive white elephant. Most observers predicted that Melius would demolish the castle and develop the land for suburban housing, just as many others had proposed over the years. Instead, Melius announced plans that seemed even more unrealistic than Otto Kahn's original vision. He intended to completely restore Oheka Castle to its 1920s glory and convert it into a luxury hotel and event venue. The scale of such a restoration was unprecedented. No one had ever attempted to bring a property of this size and complexity back from such advanced decay. The challenges were staggering. Every one of the castle's elaborate mechanical systems had failed and would need complete replacement. The roof required total reconstruction using the same Welsh slate as the original. Hundreds of windows needed restoration or replacement. The limestone exterior had to be cleaned and repointed stone by stone. The interior required everything from electrical rewiring to plaster repair to the recreation of missing decorative elements. Melius began by assembling a team of specialists unlike any that had worked on a single project since the castle's original construction. He hired master stonemasons, expert plasterers, traditional metalworkers, and craftsmen skilled in techniques that were nearly extinct. He located companies that could reproduce the original Welsh slate, match the exact limestone quarries, and recreate the specialized paints and finishes that had been used throughout the chateau. The restoration work began in 1985 and would continue for the next 20 years. Melius invested over $30 million of his own money in the project, far exceeding his original budget but refusing to compromise on quality. He insisted that every detail be restored to Otto Kahn's original specifications, even when less expensive alternatives were available. One of the most complex challenges was the ballroom, where decades of water damage had destroyed much of the gold leaf ceiling and silk wall coverings. Melius hired French artisans who specialized in historical restoration to reapply gold leaf using 18th century techniques. The silk damask was reproduced by a mill in Lyon, France, using the same patterns and weaving methods as the original. The formal gardens required equally intensive restoration. Landscape architects studied historical photographs and original blueprints to recreate the intricate parterre designs. Thousands of boxwood plants were imported and hand-trimmed to restore the elaborate topiary sculptures. The reflecting pools were rebuilt with modern waterproofing systems hidden beneath historically accurate surface finishes. As the restoration progressed, Melius faced skepticism from preservationists who questioned whether converting the castle into a commercial venue was appropriate, and from business analysts who doubted whether such an expensive project could ever be profitable. The operating costs alone, heating, lighting, and maintaining a 127-room castle, would be enormous even without considering the debt service on a $30 million restoration. But Melius had recognized something that others had missed. Oheka Castle's uniqueness made it irreplaceable in the luxury market. There was literally no other venue in America that could offer the same combination of architectural grandeur, historical significance, and romantic atmosphere. For wealthy clients planning weddings, corporate events, or special celebrations, price would be less important than exclusivity and magnificence. In 2003, after 18 years of painstaking restoration work, Oheka Castle reopened as a luxury hotel and event venue. The transformation was complete. Otto Kahn's château looked exactly as it had during the golden summers of the 1920s, but with modern conveniences seamlessly integrated into the historical fabric. Climate control, modern plumbing, high-speed internet, and state-of-the-art kitchen facilities had all been installed without compromising the authentic period atmosphere. The reopening was celebrated with a gala that deliberately echoed the great parties of the Kahn era. Guests arrived in formal evening wear, champagne was served in crystal flutes, and a full orchestra played in the restored ballroom. For one magical evening, Oheka Castle reclaimed its position as Long Island's most prestigious social destination. Gary Melius had achieved what many thought impossible. He had brought Otto Kahn's dream back to life. But unlike the original chateau, which had been a private paradise for one family and their guests, the restored Oheka Castle would serve a broader purpose. It would become a place where thousands of people could experience the grandeur that Kahn had created, where the beauty he had preserved could be shared with new generations who might never otherwise encounter such magnificent architecture and craftsmanship. Chapter 10. The Palace Reborn Today. Oheka Castle stands as one of the most successful historic preservation and adaptive reuse projects in American history. The chateau that Otto Kahn built as a private palace and that Gary Melius rescued from decay now operates as a luxury hotel that hosts over 300 events annually. Weddings, corporate retreats, charity galas, and cultural events fill the calendar year-round, bringing life and purpose back to rooms that had stood silent for half a century. The castle's guest rooms, created by converting some of the smaller chambers and former servants' quarters, offer an unprecedented level of luxury and historical authenticity. Each room is furnished with museum-quality antiques or exact reproductions, maintaining the atmosphere of a 1920s French chateau while providing all modern conveniences. Guests sleep in beds that would have been familiar to Otto Kahn's visitors, surrounded by the same architectural details and artistic elements that impressed the elite of the Gilded Age. The ballroom has reclaimed its position as one of America's most spectacular event spaces. The 40-foot gold leaf ceiling gleams as brilliantly as it did in 1920. The silk wall coverings shimmer in the light of the restored chandeliers, and the parquet floors shine like mirrors. Modern brides dance their first dances in the same room where society matrons once waltzed to full orchestras, creating new memories in a space designed for celebration. But Oheka's transformation extends beyond its function as a luxury venue. The castle has become a significant cultural institution, hosting art exhibitions, historical tours, and educational programs that share the story of the Gilded Age and the remarkable achievement of American craftsmanship. Thousands of visitors tour the castle annually, learning about Otto Kahn's vision, the skilled artisans who built his dream, and the long struggle to preserve this architectural treasure. The restored gardens have also reclaimed their former glory, though they now serve a different purpose than Otto originally intended. The formal parterre designs are maintained with the same precision as during the Kahn era, but they're enjoyed by wedding photographers, event guests, and tourists, rather than serving as a private retreat for one family. The reflecting pools that once mirrored only the Kahns and their intimate circle now reflect the faces of thousands of visitors who come to experience this preserved slice of American aristocracy. The castle's influence on popular culture has been extraordinary. Oheka has served as the location for numerous films, television shows, and music videos, introducing its beauty to audiences worldwide. Movies like Citizen Kane used it as inspiration for fictional palaces, while modern productions have filmed actual scenes within its walls. The chateau that inspired A. Scott Fitzgerald's descriptions of Gatsby's mansion has become a cultural icon in its own right. Perhaps most importantly, Oheka Castle has proven that historic preservation can be economically viable when combined with creative adaptive reuse. Gary Melius's investment in restoration has been repaid many times over through hotel revenues and event bookings. The castle employs over 150 people, supporting a significant workforce and contributing substantially to the local economy. It has become a model for how other endangered historic properties might be saved through commercial adaptation. The success has not been without challenges. Maintaining a 127-room chateau requires constant attention and substantial ongoing investment. The specialized systems installed during the restoration need regular maintenance by craftsmen skilled in traditional techniques. The antique furnishings and artistic elements require careful conservation. Weather, age, and the wear from thousands of guests create ongoing preservation challenges that require both expertise and financial resources. Climate change poses new threats that Otto Kahn never had to consider. Stronger storms, more extreme temperature swings, and changing precipitation patterns all stress the castle's historical systems and materials. The limestone facade requires more frequent cleaning and maintenance than when the castle was built. The elaborate gardens need different care strategies to cope with changing growing conditions. Yet Oheka Castle has demonstrated remarkable resilience. The quality of its original construction and the thoroughness of its restoration have created a structure that can withstand both time and intensive use. The chateau that was built to last for centuries shows every sign of achieving that goal, though its purpose has evolved far beyond Otto Kahn's original vision. For those who visit Oheka Castle today, the experience is both educational and inspirational. Walking through the restored rooms, guests encounter the extraordinary level of craftsmanship that was once standard among America's elite. They see evidence of a time when money was spent not just for comfort or convenience, but for beauty and cultural achievement. They experience architecture as art, interior design as storytelling, and landscape design as poetry made manifest in living plants and flowing water. The castle also serves as a reminder of the complex relationship between wealth and culture in American history. Otto Kahn's achievement was remarkable not just for its scale, but for its intention. He used his fortune to create something beautiful that would outlast his own life. In an era when enormous wealth often seems focused on personal consumption or financial accumulation, Kahn's example suggests a different model: wealth used as a tool for cultural creation and artistic preservation. Yet the castle's history also illustrates the fragility of such achievements. Otto's perfect world lasted barely a decade before economic and social changes made it unsustainable. The chateau survived only because Gary Melius found a way to adapt it to new circumstances, transforming a private palace into a public resource. This adaptation required not just financial resources, but vision, persistence, and a willingness to take enormous risks for uncertain returns. Chapter 11. The Legacy of Dreams. Standing in the grand hall of Oheka Castle today, surrounded by the hand-carved boiserie that Otto Kahn imported from France a century ago, you can almost feel the weight of history and the persistence of human dreams. Every architectural detail tells a story, not just of wealth and privilege, but of a man's desire to create beauty that would outlast his own mortality. Otto Kahn achieved something remarkable. He built a perfect world. For a few brief years in the 1920s, Oheka Castle represented everything he had dreamed of: artistic achievement, cultural sophistication, social acceptance, and the transformation of mere money into lasting beauty. The chateau was proof that an immigrant banker could create something as magnificent as any European aristocrat, that American wealth could support the same level of culture as centuries-old dynasties. But Kahn's story also illustrates the limitations of perfection. His ideal world required conditions that were impossible to sustain: unlimited financial resources, a stable social order, and the cooperation of economic and political forces beyond his control. When the Great Depression shattered the foundations of his wealth, when changing social attitudes made his European formality seem outdated, when his health failed and his family scattered, the perfect world he had created became impossible to maintain. The decades of abandonment that followed Kahn's death demonstrate how quickly even the most substantial achievements can decay without constant care and investment. Oheka Castle's near destruction serves as a reminder that preservation is never automatic, that cultural treasures survive only when each generation decides they are worth the effort and expense required to maintain them. Gary Melius's restoration represents a different kind of achievement: the adaptation of historical vision to contemporary reality. By converting Kahn's private palace into a public venue, Melius found a way to preserve the chateau's beauty while giving it a sustainable economic purpose. The restored Oheka Castle serves thousands of visitors annually, sharing Kahn's aesthetic achievement with people who would never have been admitted to his exclusive parties. This transformation raises important questions about the relationship between preservation and change. Is the Oheka Castle of today, filled with wedding parties and corporate events, the same cultural achievement that Kahn created? Has something essential been lost in the conversion from private residence to commercial venue? Or has the adaptation actually enhanced the castle's cultural significance by making it accessible to a broader public? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that buildings, like the cultures that create them, must evolve to survive. Kahn's chateau was always more than just a residence. It was a statement about beauty, culture, and the power of human imagination to create meaning through architecture. That statement remains valid even though the specific social conditions that made it possible have disappeared. The castle's influence on American culture extends far beyond its immediate preservation. Oheka inspired F. Scott Fitzgerald's vision of J. Gatsby's mansion, creating one of the most powerful symbols in American literature. It has served as a location for countless films and television productions, introducing its beauty to global audiences. It has influenced architectural and interior design trends, reminding contemporary designers of the level of craftsmanship and attention to detail that was once standard in luxury construction. More broadly, Oheka Castle represents an important chapter in the ongoing American conversation about wealth, culture, and social responsibility. Kahn used his fortune to create something beautiful rather than merely accumulating more money. His example suggests that great wealth can serve purposes beyond personal comfort, that it can support art, preserve culture, and create lasting beauty that enriches society long after its creators are gone. Yet the castle's history also reveals the complex social dynamics of American achievement. Kahn's wealth came from financial manipulation and railroad speculation that enriched investors, while sometimes exploiting workers and communities. His cultural philanthropy, magnificent as it was built on economic foundations that were often morally ambiguous. This tension between cultural achievement and economic exploitation runs throughout American history, from the plantation mansions of the antebellum South to the industrial palaces of the Gilded Age. Today's Oheka Castle serves as both inspiration and warning. It demonstrates what human imagination can achieve when resources and vision combine, but it also shows how quickly such achievements can be lost when the conditions that support them disappear. The chateau's survival required not just one man's dream, but the commitment of subsequent generations to preserve and adapt that dream to changing circumstances. For current and future visitors to Oheka Castle, the experience offers multiple layers of meaning. On the surface, it provides access to extraordinary beauty, architectural details, artistic elements, and landscape design of a quality rarely seen in contemporary construction. At a deeper level, it tells the story of American ambition, both its achievements and its limitations. At the deepest level, it raises fundamental questions about the purpose of wealth, the responsibility of privilege, and the human desire to create something lasting in a world of constant change. Otto Kahn died believing that his perfect world had failed, that his dreams had been defeated by circumstances beyond his control. He could not have imagined that his chateau would survive not just decades of abandonment, but would ultimately find new life-serving purposes he never envisioned. In the end, his vision proved more durable than the specific social conditions that made it possible. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of Oheka Castle's remarkable story, that human dreams, when embodied in lasting form, can transcend the limitations of their creator's time and circumstances. The beauty that Otto Kahn captured in stone and craftsmanship continues to inspire and educate, even though the world he built it for has long since disappeared. His chateau stands as proof that the desire to create meaning through beauty is one of humanity's most persistent and valuable impulses, and that such creations, properly cared for, can outlive the empires that built them. Today, as visitors walk through the restored halls of Oheka Castle, they participate in a conversation that spans more than a century. They encounter the vision of a German Jewish immigrant who wanted to create perfect beauty in an imperfect world. They witness the craftsmanship of artisans who devoted their skills to making that vision real. They see the results of a modern entrepreneur's commitment to preserving that achievement for future generations. And in experiencing this extraordinary place, this palace that rose from dreams, fell into darkness, and emerged renewed, they become part of its continuing story, carrying forward the legacy of everyone who believed that human life should be surrounded by beauty, and that some dreams are worth whatever it costs to make them real. The chateau endures, as Otto Kahn always hoped it would, not as a monument to his personal glory, but as a testament to the power of human imagination, to create meaning that outlasts mortality. In that sense, his perfect world was never really lost. It simply evolved, finding new purposes while preserving the beauty that gave it meaning in the first place. Chapter 12. Shadows and Spotlights. Fame came to Oheka Castle not through its original grandeur, but through its second life as America's most photogenic mansion. From Hollywood films to celebrity weddings, from fashion shoots to music videos, the restored chateau became a backdrop for modern dreams, playing the same role in contemporary culture that it had once played in Gilded Age society. The transformation began almost immediately after Gary Melius completed the restoration in 2003. Location scouts, who had been watching the project's progress for years, descended on the castle like moths to a flame. What they found was extraordinary, a mansion that photographed beautifully from every angle, with rooms that could represent any period from the 18th century to the present, and gardens that provided perfect backdrops for romantic scenes. The first major production to use Oheka Castle was the 2008 music video for Jonas Brothers' Sucker, which featured the pop stars and their wives in elaborate period costumes, dancing through the chateau's grand rooms. The video went viral, introducing Oheka Castle to millions of viewers worldwide who had never heard of Otto Kahn or the Gilded Age. Suddenly, the castle that had inspired the Great Gatsby was inspiring a new generation of dreamers. Hollywood followed quickly. Martin Scorsese used the ballroom for scenes in The Aviator, recreating the glamorous parties of Howard Hughes's era. The castle's authentic 1920s atmosphere made it perfect for period films, but its timeless elegance also attracted contemporary productions. Television shows like Gossip Girl and Royal Pains featured the castle prominently, cementing its status as the ultimate symbol of American luxury. But it was the wedding industry that truly transformed Oheka Castle's cultural significance. Wealthy couples from around the world began booking the château for elaborate celebrations that rivaled royal weddings. The same ballroom where Otto Kahn had entertained titans of industry now hosted hedge fund managers and tech billionaires, Russian oligarchs and oil sheikhs, all seeking to capture some of the magic that money could buy. Each wedding became a spectacle. Flowers arrived by the truckload, orchestras flew in from Vienna, and celebrity chefs prepared feasts that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Wedding planners treated each event like a movie production, with detailed shot lists for photographers and carefully choreographed moments designed to create perfect Instagram content. The irony was not lost on cultural critics. Otto Kahn had built Oheka Castle to escape the vulgarity of new money, to create a refined environment where culture and sophistication could flourish. Now, a century later, the castle had become the ultimate stage for displaying new money, a place where wealth was performed rather than lived. Yet there was something democratic about this transformation. While Otto Kahn's parties had been limited to a small circle of elite society, the restored Oheka Castle served anyone who could afford its prices. The chateau that had once excluded people based on social class now welcomed anyone with sufficient financial resources. In America's meritocratic society, money had replaced breeding as the price of admission. The castle's appearance in popular culture also sparked renewed interest in the Gilded Age and the stories of America's great mansion builders. Documentaries about Otto Kahn began appearing on television. Architecture tours of the castle became popular educational experiences. Books about the Gold Coast era found new audiences among people who had discovered Oheka through movies or social media. Social media, in particular, gave Oheka Castle a kind of immortality that Otto Kahn could never have imagined. Every wedding, every party, every event generated hundreds of photographs that were shared across Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. The castle's image circulated globally, reaching millions of people who would never visit but who now knew of its existence and beauty. This constant exposure brought both benefits and challenges. The positive publicity helped maintain Oheka's reputation as America's premier luxury venue, ensuring a steady stream of high-paying clients. But the intense scrutiny also meant that every detail had to be perfect. Social media users were quick to notice and criticize any flaw, any sign of wear or neglect. The pressure to maintain Instagram-worthy perfection at all times added new costs to the castle's operation. Gardens had to be immaculate year-round, not just during growing season. Interior spaces required constant refreshing to avoid looking dated in photographs. Even the staff uniforms had to meet the aesthetic standards of couples planning to post photos online. Celebrity culture also brought new security challenges. High-profile weddings attracted paparazzi, requiring sophisticated security systems and careful coordination with local law enforcement. The castle that Otto Kahn had built as a private retreat now needed the security infrastructure of a small fortress to protect its famous guests from unwanted attention. Despite these complications, Gary Melius embraced Oheka Castle's role in popular culture. He understood that fame translated directly into financial success and that the castle's appearance in movies and magazines was the best advertising money couldn't buy. Each celebrity wedding or Hollywood production raised the chateau's profile and justified higher rates for future events. The castle's cultural impact extended beyond mere entertainment. It became a symbol of aspiration for immigrants and entrepreneurs who saw in Otto Kahn's story a reflection of their own dreams. The fact that a German Jewish banker had built America's most beautiful mansion inspired others who felt like outsiders in American society. Oheka Castle proved that in America, at least sometimes, talent and determination could overcome prejudice and exclusion. As the 21st century progressed, Oheka Castle found itself at the center of debates about wealth inequality and social justice. Critics pointed out that the cost of a single wedding at the castle exceeded the annual income of hundreds of American families. They questioned whether such extravagant displays of wealth were appropriate in a society struggling with poverty and inequality. Defenders argued that luxury venues like Oheka Castle provided employment for hundreds of people and contributed significantly to the local economy. They noted that the castle's preservation as a working venue ensured its survival in ways that government funding alone could never accomplish. The controversy only increased public interest in the castle and its complex legacy. In the end, Oheka Castle's transformation into a popular culture icon represented a uniquely American form of preservation. While European castles were maintained as museums frozen in time, America's great mansion had evolved into something living and dynamic. It continued to serve the same function Otto Kahn had intended, creating magical moments for the wealthy, while adapting to new technologies and social expectations. The shadows of its past, Otto Kahn's loneliness, the decades of abandonment, the near destruction that almost claimed it, now coexisted with the spotlights of fame. Every photograph taken in its rooms captured not just contemporary glamour, but also the persistence of human dreams across generations. The chateau that had once represented the isolation of extreme wealth had become paradoxically a shared cultural reference point, familiar to millions who would never set foot inside its walls. Chapter 13. The Price of Perfection. Maintaining paradise is expensive. Every day, teams of specialists work to preserve Otto Kahn's vision against the relentless forces of time, weather, and use. The limestone walls need constant cleaning. The Welsh slate roof requires expert maintenance, and the elaborate gardens demand year-round attention from master horticulturists. In a world where everything is disposable, Oheka Castle stands as a monument to the cost of permanence. Gary Melius discovered this reality within months of completing the restoration. The château, that had cost $30 million to restore, required nearly $3 million annually just to maintain at its current level. Every system in the building, heating, cooling, electrical, plumbing, needed constant attention from specialists who understood both historical preservation and modern technology. The limestone exterior presented the most visible challenge. Otto Kahn's architects had chosen Indiana limestone for its beauty and durability, but a century of exposure to Long Island's coastal climate had taken its toll. Salt air accelerated the deterioration of the stone, requiring sections to be repointed annually. Acid rain, a problem unknown in Kahn's era, dissolved the calcium carbonate in the limestone, creating a constant need for cleaning and treatment. Professional stone conservators arrived at Oheka Castle every spring to assess winter damage and plan restoration work. Using techniques borrowed from European cathedral restoration, they cleaned each block with specialized chemicals, filled cracks with lime mortar, and applied protective coatings to slow future deterioration. The work was painstakingly slow and extraordinarily expensive, but absolutely essential to preserve the chateau's appearance. The Welsh slate roof, once Otto Kahn's pride, had become Gary Melius's nightmare. Individual slates cracked during freeze-thaw cycles, loosened during storms, and occasionally fell during high winds. Replacing even a single slate required specialists who understood traditional installation techniques. Finding craftsmen capable of working on such roofs became increasingly difficult as older roofers retired and younger workers focused on modern materials. Climate change added new complications that Otto Kahn never had to consider. Stronger storms stressed the castle's historical systems, while more extreme temperature swings caused expansion and contraction that opened new cracks in walls and roofing. Hurricane Sandy in 2012 caused over $2 million in damage to Oheka Castle, despite the building's solid construction and careful preparation. Inside the castle, maintaining authenticity while meeting modern expectations created constant dilemmas. The original electrical system, state-of-the-art in 1920, had been completely replaced during restoration, but even the new wiring required regular updates to handle contemporary technology demands. Wi-Fi networks, security systems, and audio-visual equipment for events all needed to be integrated into rooms designed for gaslights and telegraphs. The elaborate HVAC system, designed to preserve period rooms while maintaining guest comfort, consumed enormous amounts of energy. Climate control in a 127-room chateau required industrial-scale equipment hidden within historical walls. The monthly utility bills resembled those of a small factory, not a residential building, even with the most efficient modern systems available. Staffing presented its own unique challenges. Maintaining Oheka Castle required not just traditional hospitality workers, but specialists in historical preservation, antique restoration, and period craftsmanship. The castle employed full-time conservators to care for artwork and furnishings, master gardeners trained in historical landscape maintenance, and engineers who understood both modern building systems and historical architecture. Finding qualified staff became increasingly difficult as specialized skills became rarer. The craftsmen who understood traditional plastering techniques, period paint formulations, and historical restoration methods were aging out of the workforce. Training new specialists required years of apprenticeship and commanded premium salaries that further increased operating costs. The gardens demanded year-round attention from experts in historical horticulture. The formal French parterre designs that Otto Kahn had installed required precise maintenance schedules that hadn't changed since the 18th century. Box hedges needed trimming multiple times per season to maintain their geometric perfection. Topiary sculptures required daily attention during growing season to prevent them from losing their shapes. Modern environmental challenges complicated garden maintenance in ways Otto Kahn never anticipated. Invasive species, unknown in his era, constantly threatened to overwhelm carefully planned plantings. Climate change altered growing patterns, forcing gardeners to adapt traditional techniques to new conditions. Pesticides and fertilizers that had once been freely used were now restricted or banned, requiring organic alternatives that were more expensive and less predictable. The reflecting pools that added such beauty to the formal gardens became constant maintenance challenges. The original pools had been designed with gravity-fed water systems that were elegant but inefficient. Modern pool technology could maintain water quality more easily, but installing contemporary filtration systems without destroying historical authenticity required creative engineering and substantial expense. Insurance costs alone threatened to make Oheka Castle financially unsustainable. Covering a 127-room chateau filled with priceless antiques and hosting hundreds of events annually required specialized policies that few companies were willing to write. The comprehensive coverage necessary to protect both the building and its contents cost more annually than most people's homes were worth. Security represented another massive ongoing expense. The castle's high profile made it a target for theft, vandalism, and unwanted intrusion. Round-the-clock security guards, sophisticated alarm systems, and regular patrols by private security firms were essential but expensive. Celebrity events required additional security measures that could cost tens of thousands of dollars for a single weekend. Technology updates presented a perpetual challenge. Systems installed during the restoration were already becoming obsolete within a decade. Audio-visual equipment for events, computer networks for hotel operations, and communication systems for staff coordination all required regular replacement and upgrading. Integrating new technology into historically sensitive spaces without damaging original features required careful planning and expensive custom solutions. Even routine maintenance costs far exceeded those of conventional buildings. Cleaning the chateau's crystal chandeliers required specialists who could disassemble, clean, and reassemble the elaborate fixtures without damage. Maintaining the wooden floors required refinishing techniques appropriate for antique parquet. Even replacing light bulbs became complicated when fixtures required specific types of vintage-style bulbs to maintain authentic appearance. The pressure to maintain Instagram-worthy perfection for social media added new dimensions to maintenance costs. Every surface that might appear in photographs had to be immaculate at all times. Touch-up painting, carpet cleaning, and furniture polishing became constant activities rather than seasonal tasks. The standards for maintenance had effectively risen from good enough for guests to perfect enough for professional photography. Despite these crushing costs, Gary Melius never seriously considered reducing maintenance standards. He understood that Oheka Castle's value, both financial and cultural, depended entirely on preserving Otto Kahn's vision of perfection. Any compromise in quality would begin a downward spiral that could ultimately destroy everything he had worked to accomplish. The economics of perfection meant that only the highest-paying events could justify the castle's continued operation. Wedding packages started at $150,000 and could easily exceed $500,000 for elaborate celebrations. Corporate events, charity galas, and private parties were priced accordingly. The chateau that Otto Kahn had built for the exclusive enjoyment of America's elite remained, by economic necessity, available only to those willing and able to pay premium prices. Yet for those who could afford it, Oheka Castle delivered an experience that justified its extraordinary costs. Guests encountered craftsmanship and attention to detail that was literally irreplaceable. They walked through rooms where every element had been preserved or restored to museum quality. They enjoyed gardens that represented centuries of horticultural tradition maintained by contemporary masters of their craft. The price of perfection at Oheka Castle ultimately reflected the broader challenge of preserving America's architectural heritage. Historic mansions across the country face similar maintenance challenges, though few had found economically sustainable solutions. Oheka's success as a luxury venue provided a model for adaptive reuse that could preserve other endangered properties, but only for those buildings that could command premium prices in the luxury market. As maintenance costs continued to rise and skilled craftsmen became scarcer, the future of perfect preservation grew increasingly uncertain. Oheka Castle stood as both an inspiration and a warning. Human beings could create lasting beauty, but only with perpetual vigilance, extraordinary expense, and unwavering commitment to standards that most of the world considered impossibly high. Chapter 14. American Dreams, European Ghosts. Otto Kahn's story reflects the complex relationship between wealth, culture, and belonging in America. He achieved everything the American dream promised: fortune, influence, and recognition, yet he remained forever marked by his origins. His chateau became both his triumph and his isolation, a perfect European palace that could never quite bridge the gap between what he was and what American society would allow him to become. The contradiction at the heart of Kahn's American experience was embodied in every stone of Oheka Castle. Here was a German Jewish immigrant who had accumulated one of the greatest fortunes in American history, who had financed the railroads that connected the continent and the industries that built the modern economy. Yet when he sought to express his success through architecture, he looked not to American models but to the châteaux of France, the palaces of a civilization that had excluded people like him for centuries. This cultural confusion reflected the broader immigrant experience in early 20th century America. Newcomers were encouraged to assimilate, to become American, but the definition of what that meant remained frustratingly elusive. For Protestant immigrants from Northern Europe, the transition was relatively straightforward. For Jewish immigrants from Germany, despite their wealth and education, acceptance remained partial and conditional. Kahn's response was to create his own definition of American success, one that combined European cultural sophistication with American financial power. Oheka Castle represented his vision of what American aristocracy could become, more cultured than European nobility, because it was self-made, more refined than American industrialists, because it was informed by centuries of European tradition. Yet, even at the height of his success, Kahn encountered the limits of American tolerance. The most exclusive clubs remained closed to him. Certain neighborhoods maintained unspoken restrictions against Jewish residents, and business opportunities that were freely available to his Protestant contemporaries were subtly denied to him. His wealth could buy him a castle, but it couldn't buy him complete acceptance. The architectural choices at Oheka Castle reflected these social tensions. Kahn deliberately chose French rather than English models for his chateau, perhaps because France had been more welcoming to Jewish citizens than other European countries. The Château de Fontainebleau that inspired his design was a symbol of centralized royal power rather than feudal aristocracy, suggesting Kahn's preference for merit-based authority over inherited privilege. The scale of Oheka Castle also sent a clear message about American possibility. European chateaux had been built over centuries, gradually expanding as family fortunes grew and royal favor waxed and waned. Kahn's castle was conceived and executed as a complete vision, built in just 4 years with resources that exceeded those of most European royal families. It was a demonstration that American wealth, properly applied, could exceed European achievement. Yet the very perfection of Oheka Castle highlighted the artificial nature of Kahn's achievement. European palaces carried the weight of history, the accumulated stories of generations who had lived within their walls. Kahn's château, despite its historical authenticity, was essentially a stage set, a perfect reproduction of aristocratic life without the organic development that gave European architecture its deeper meaning. The social dynamics within Oheka Castle revealed similar contradictions. Kahn entertained European nobility who might not have received him in their own countries, American industrialists who privately questioned his religious background, and artists and intellectuals who depended on his patronage but sometimes resented his wealth. The chateau became a neutral ground where different forms of power, financial, cultural, social, could interact without the normal hierarchies that governed society beyond its walls. Kahn's children experienced these contradictions even more acutely than their father. Born into enormous wealth and raised in a palace, they nonetheless knew they were different from their peers in ways that money couldn't change. They attended the same exclusive schools, participated in the same social activities, and enjoyed the same privileges as other wealthy children, but they always carried the burden of their father's immigrant status and Jewish heritage. The rise of anti-Semitism in America during the 1920s and 1930s made these divisions more explicit and painful. Henry Ford's publication of anti-Jewish propaganda, the revival of the Ku Klux Klan, and the growing influence of European fascist ideas created an atmosphere where even wealthy, assimilated Jewish families felt increasingly unwelcome. Kahn's response was to retreat further into his cultural activities, supporting artists and causes that affirmed universal human values rather than narrow sectarian interests. World War II brought these tensions to a crisis point. As reports of Nazi persecution reached America, Kahn found himself torn between his German heritage and his Jewish identity, between his love of European culture and his horror at European politics. The chateau that had represented the pinnacle of European civilization now seemed tainted by association with the continent's descent into barbarism. The abandonment of Oheka Castle after Kahn's death reflected more than just financial difficulties. It symbolized the end of an entire approach to American success. The immigrant dream of achieving acceptance through cultural sophistication had proven inadequate. The next generation of Jewish Americans would pursue integration through different means: professional achievement, political participation, and gradual social change, rather than architectural grandeur. Gary Melius's restoration of Oheka Castle a half-century later took place in a very different America. The civil rights movement had challenged legal discrimination, immigration law had been reformed to eliminate ethnic quotas, and American society had become more accepting of diversity. The chateau that Otto Kahn had built to overcome exclusion could now be appreciated simply as a magnificent achievement, without the painful social subtext that had surrounded its original construction. Yet even in its restored form, Oheka Castle carried traces of its founder's complex relationship with American society. The European models that Kahn had chosen reflected his belief that American culture needed to be elevated through contact with older civilizations. The perfection he had achieved suggested his conviction that immigrants had to exceed native-born Americans in refinement and sophistication to earn acceptance. Modern visitors to Oheka Castle encounter these layers of meaning, whether they recognize them or not. The chateau stands as a monument to immigrant achievement, but also to the costs of that achievement. It represents both the openness of American society to talent and energy, and the barriers that society erected against those who were different. It embodies both the possibility of reinvention that drew millions to America and the persistence of prejudices that limited that reinvention. The castle's current role as a luxury venue serves a more diverse clientele than Otto Kahn ever entertained. Russian oligarchs, Chinese industrialists, Indian tech entrepreneurs, and others whose backgrounds would have been unimaginable to Kahn now celebrate their successes within his walls. In some sense, his vision of America as a place where achievement could overcome ancestry has been vindicated, though the forms that achievement takes have evolved far beyond what he could have anticipated. The persistence of Oheka Castle as a cultural landmark suggests that Kahn's strategy, while personally painful, was ultimately successful. His chateau survived because it represented something genuinely valuable, a synthesis of European refinement and American ambition that created something new and beautiful. The building that began as one man's attempt to buy his way into American society became, through its survival and transformation, a permanent part of American cultural heritage. Today's America still grapples with questions about immigration, assimilation, and belonging that troubled Otto Kahn a century ago. The castle he built stands as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale, proof that determination and resources can overcome enormous obstacles, but also a reminder that acceptance and belonging cannot be purchased, only earned through time and the gradual evolution of social attitudes. In the end, Otto Kahn's American dream was both fulfilled and frustrated by the chateau he created. He achieved the immortality he sought, but not in the way he intended. His perfect European palace became a distinctly American landmark, a symbol of the country's capacity to transform immigrant dreams into lasting contributions to the national culture. The ghosts that haunted his achievement were not supernatural spirits, but the persistent tensions between ambition and acceptance that continued to define the American experience. Chapter 15. The Castle Eternal. As the sun sets behind Oheka Castle today, its limestone walls glow with the same golden light that enchanted Otto Kahn a century ago. The chateau he built to last forever has indeed achieved a kind of immortality, though not in the way he imagined. His private dream became a public treasure, his personal monument became a shared heritage, and his perfect world evolved into something even more enduring. A place where beauty serves not one man's vision, but the dreams of everyone who encounters it. Standing at the edge of the terrace where F. Scott Fitzgerald once contemplated the beautiful emptiness of American wealth, modern visitors encounter a different kind of beauty, one enriched rather than diminished by its accessibility. The gardens that once bloomed for Otto Kahn alone now provide joy to thousands of wedding guests, corporate retreats, and cultural tourists who find inspiration in their carefully maintained perfection. The transformation of Oheka Castle from private palace to public venue represents more than just adaptive reuse. It embodies a fundamental shift in how American society thinks about wealth, culture, and legacy. Otto Kahn built his chateau to establish his family's place in American aristocracy, to create a private world where European sophistication could flourish under American prosperity. A century later, that same building serves a democratic purpose, offering its magnificence to anyone willing to pay for the experience. This democratization of luxury reflects broader changes in American society since Kahn's era. The rigid social hierarchies that once determined access to beauty and culture have given way to more fluid arrangements based on economic achievement rather than inherited status. While the prices charged by Oheka Castle limit its accessibility, they do so based on financial capacity rather than family background, ethnic heritage, or social connections. The castle's survival and prosperity also demonstrate the power of market forces to preserve cultural treasures that government funding alone might not sustain. European palaces maintained as museums often struggle with declining visitor numbers and insufficient maintenance budgets. Oheka Castle's commercial success ensures its preservation while generating the resources necessary for ongoing maintenance and improvement. Yet this commercial model comes with its own challenges and compromises. The building that Otto Kahn designed for private contemplation must now accommodate hundreds of events annually, with all the wear and tear that intensive use creates. The gardens planned for peaceful walks must serve as backdrops for elaborate celebrations that sometimes strain their delicate beauty. The rooms conceived for intimate gatherings must function as venues for large parties that test their acoustic and spatial limits. Modern technology has created new possibilities for sharing Oheka Castle's beauty with global audiences. Virtual tours allow people around the world to explore the chateau's rooms and gardens without traveling to Long Island. Social media spreads images of the castle across cultural and economic boundaries, inspiring new generations who might never have encountered such architecture otherwise. Digital preservation techniques ensure that the building's appearance and details will survive even if the physical structure eventually succumbs to time. The castle's role in popular culture has given it a different kind of immortality than Otto Kahn envisioned. His vision was of family legacy passed down through generations, of a dynasty that would endure through centuries of careful stewardship. Instead, Oheka Castle achieved permanence through constant reinvention, appearing in new films, hosting new celebrations, inspiring new dreams with each passing year. Climate change poses unprecedented challenges for the castle's long-term survival. Stronger storms, rising sea levels, and more extreme weather patterns threaten the building in ways that Otto Kahn never had to consider. The limestone that has withstood a century of weather may face accelerated deterioration from changing atmospheric conditions. The elaborate gardens may require complete redesign to survive in a warmer, more volatile climate. Future preservation efforts will need to balance historical authenticity with practical adaptation to changing conditions. Installing renewable energy systems, improving flood defenses, and upgrading infrastructure for climate resilience will require careful integration with historical architecture. The challenge will be maintaining Otto Kahn's vision while protecting the building against environmental threats he could never have imagined. The economic model that sustains Oheka Castle today may also evolve in response to changing social expectations and economic conditions. Future generations might demand more inclusive access to cultural treasures, leading to new funding mechanisms that blend public and private resources. Technological advances might create virtual experiences that reduce the need for physical visits while maintaining the castle's financial viability. Yet whatever changes the future brings, certain aspects of Otto Kahn's achievement seem likely to endure. The human impulse to create beauty that transcends individual mortality appears as strong today as it was in Kahn's era. The desire to transform wealth into lasting cultural contributions continues to motivate contemporary philanthropists and collectors. The appreciation for craftsmanship and attention to detail that Kahn embodied finds new expression in restoration projects and preservation efforts worldwide. The craftsmen who maintain Oheka Castle today work with the same dedication to perfection that motivated the original builders. Master stonemasons still clean each limestone block by hand. Skilled gardeners still trim topiary sculptures with hand tools, and specialist conservators still apply traditional techniques to preserve priceless artwork and furnishings. In a world increasingly dominated by mass production and digital automation, the castle stands as a monument to human skill and artistic achievement. Educational programs at Oheka Castle help ensure that knowledge of traditional building techniques survives into the future. Apprenticeship programs train new generations of craftsmen in skills that might otherwise disappear. Academic partnerships with architecture and preservation programs provide opportunities for students to study historical construction methods firsthand. The castle serves not just as a venue for celebration, but as a living classroom where old knowledge is passed to new practitioners. The philosophical questions that surrounded Otto Kahn's original vision remain relevant today. What obligations do the wealthy have to society? How can private resources serve public purposes? What role should market forces play in cultural preservation? Oheka Castle provides a complex but generally successful example of how these questions might be answered, though other solutions will surely emerge as circumstances change. For visitors who encounter Oheka Castle today, whether as guests at celebrations or participants in cultural tours, the experience offers multiple layers of meaning. On the surface, they encounter extraordinary beauty, architectural details, artistic elements, and landscape design of a quality rarely seen in contemporary construction. At a deeper level, they connect with the story of American achievement and the complex relationship between wealth and culture that the castle represents. Most profoundly, visitors experience the endurance of human creativity and the power of individual vision to create lasting beauty. Otto Kahn's dream outlived not just his own mortality, but the social conditions that made it possible, the economic system that funded it, and the cultural assumptions that shaped it. The castle stands as proof that well-conceived and carefully executed human achievements can transcend the limitations of their time and continue to inspire future generations. As night falls over Oheka Castle and lights begin to twinkle in its windows, the building assumes the magical quality that has enchanted visitors for more than a century. The same terrace where Otto Kahn once stood surveying his perfect world now hosts new dreamers contemplating their own visions of achievement and beauty. The chateau that began as one man's attempt to buy immortality has achieved something greater. It has become a permanent part of the American landscape of aspiration, a place where individual dreams become shared treasures and where the past continues to inspire the future. The castle endures, as Otto Kahn always hoped it would, not as a monument to his personal glory, but as a testament to the power of human imagination to create meaning that outlasts mortality. In that sense, his perfect world was never really lost. It simply evolved, finding new purposes while preserving the beauty that gave it meaning in the first place. Oheka Castle stands eternal not because it never changes, but because it continues to serve the unchanging human need for beauty, inspiration, and the hope that our best efforts can survive long after we are gone.